Good evening. Magandang gabi. My name is Joe Zeiker. I'm the host for this week's edition of Bring the World Home. This is a program regularly scheduled about people who dream about adventure, people who think about adventure, people who take a chance on adventure. Today's guest is Phil Olson. You went to college, you traveled around the world, you got into the Air Force Reserve, you traveled to Germany, you were one of the first Peace Corps volunteers in the Philippines, you, in the process of being in the Peace Corps, you went to the small areas of Cebu in the barrios. You wound up at one point with a bunch of volunteers going out into the ocean to save people who were drowning on a boat, and you also saved a priest's life and flew all over the Philippines. Is that true? That's the story?
Magandang gabi, yes.
Bill, you got to get a life. That's all there is to it, okay? You just haven't done enough in this world. I want to talk a little bit about your Peace Corps experience, but first of all, I want to know a little bit about you. You were born where?
I was born in Duluth, Minnesota, of Norwegian immigrant parents, and brought up in northern New York State.
Okay, you went to college?
In Connecticut, a little school called Wesleyan University.
Now, at one point you studied became a pilot, is that right?
I was drafted for the Korean War.
Okay, so you got an invitation to travel from Uncle Sam.
And instead of carrying a BAR as was destined to do, I volunteered as an aviation cadet, learned to fly airplanes in the U.S. Air Force.
Where were you trained?
I was trained in Texas and in Missouri and in Mississippi.
Fly jets or props?
Both.
Okay.
And single-engine fighter jets.
You also went off to Germany?
Went off to Germany, and there I flew the C-119 flying boxcar.
Okay, that's in the in the 50s, right?
That was in the mid-50s,
okay.
Yes.
At some point, you decided or thought about or learned about the Peace Corps. Is that right?
I was working for an airline at that time, yes. And I'd finished my master's degree at UCLA.
A master's in what?
Journalism.
My goodness. And you were a pilot too?
I was a pilot already, yes.
And this is commercial?
Yes.
Who did you fly for?
I didn't fly for a living. I was public relations for the airline, and I was flying in the Air Force Reserves.
Okay. And you then heard about the Peace Corps, I guess, at one point?
Heard John Kennedy make his famous speech,
okay,
and said, I think we ought to try it.
Okay. Now, for all the history buffs, I might be wrong, but I think John Kennedy stole the idea from Hubert Humphrey.
Yes,
I think Hubert still gets the credit for that one.
Well,
and what did you think about the Peace Corps? What were you thinking about?
Well, my thinking was it was a grand idea, and I was able to do it, and my then wife said she would do it too, and we both volunteered and did it.
You were still technically in the reserves or now out?
No, I was still in the reserves.
Okay,
yeah.
But you were working commercially?
And I was working for an airline, yes.
And your wife worked for some fairly big corporation? Or?
The Rand Corporation,
okay,
yes.
So she was an analyst? Or?
She was an editor.
Okay, and so the two of you thought about it, and what was it that intrigued you about the Peace Corps? Because you had had a lot of experiences up to that point.
Well, the Peace Corps was a brave new idea, and I thoroughly appreciated the importance of what it could do, and it never disappointed me. To this day, I think it's a brave, great idea.
What did you think you were going to be doing by going into the Peace Corps? What were you hoping to accomplish?
I had no idea. I just didn't want to be an administrator, which I had already examined and had some experience at, but I ended up in a volunteer leader role and eventually administrator again.
Okay. Now your wife and you both decided to go together, so it's a little bit different. Many times volunteers go out and they're single. You had at least a companion, and you were sent where to train?
We were sent to Penn State in 1962, March of 1962. We trained for 3 months at Penn State. Excellent training, a lot of Filipino national host country trainers, and they trained us in Tagalog and sent us to a Cebuano-speaking area.
A Visayan.
Yes.
community. Well, good. Well, nothing's perfect in this world. But you had your, what, 12 weeks, and you had some insight. You had never been a teacher before.
No, not per se.
Okay. And you were going to be sent to a community to be an elementary school teacher.
Yes. It was a very rural, very underserved area.
Okay.
And the children were eager to learn. The teachers were eager to have us there. And instead of just teaching English, I ended up teaching science and mathematics and weather and a bunch of other things.
I want to ask you about the country when you first got into the Philippines, you and your wife. Were you sent to the location where you were going to work, or did you first go to some other location?
We first went to the University of the Philippines, Quezon City, just outside of Manila.
Can you describe where you were eventually sent?
Well, eventually we were sent to the Visayas, to Cebu, and to a little community called Bolhoon, which is 101 kilometers south of Cebu City, and a very, very old, traditional Philippine Spanish church with a Filipino priest who was my neighbor and with whom we got very
We'll get
close.
to him in a minute.
Okay.
Now, Philippines is what? How many islands?
7,100 islands is what they say, with 101 mutually unintelligible dialects.
Okay, so you've got all kinds of islands, some very different people, right?
Oh, yes.
Very different histories,
Yes.
and theoretically, it's a nation. And I was asking you earlier today, whose idea was that? And you said probably the Spaniards when they took the
Yes.
place over. So they lumped everything together.
They're an archipelago that stretches from roughly 30 degrees north all the way to just a couple of degrees above the equator. And it goes from Luzon down to Mindanao and to the Sulu archipelago, which goes directly up to the Borneo waters. So they're part of the same series of islands that goes all the way down to Sumatra and Java, and of course New Guinea further east.
Okay. Now you and your wife then wind up being sent to a very small rural village. Can you describe how close you are to the sea, what type of mountains you have, and what do you mean by rural village?
The rural village of Bolhoon, when we arrived there in 1962, had approximately 3,000 population, but they were diversified. Many of them spent most of the week in the adjacent hills and mountains doing farming. The farming was oftentimes just copra, coconuts, upland rice, some potato, sweet potato varieties.
Is this subsistence farming where they're growing their food for the day to be able to live and
largely subsistence, and
no industry? It's really a little rural
no
village.
industry except fishing. There was a great deal of good fishing in the China Sea and the inside Sulu Sea. There were many varieties of fish, and we never wanted for good fish.
Now you're living right on the coast, are you
Right
not?
on the sea.
Okay,
Yes.
what type of house did you and your wife wind up getting?
Our host
What
family.
romantic bungalow can you
Our
describe
host
for us,
family
Carl?
turned over a house that was pre-World War II, made of chiefly bamboo with split bamboo floors, and a lovely roof made of sheaves of a plant, and it actually turned out to be waterproof.
Thatched roof in a sense.
Yes. Mhm.
Uh-huh.
And
many
it
rooms?
was raised.
Many rooms?
We had 3 rooms. I had a big living room, which I turned into a library. Brought a bunch of books from Penn State. And
Where's the kitchen?
the kitchen is right adjacent to the living room. And we actually made a concrete kitchen sink and an enclosed bath and shower.
I want to hear about the water.
Okay.
When it started out, it didn't have any of these.
Oh, no, it had no internal water. We took a shower using a fire extinguisher.
Tell me about that, because one
Well-
of the things the Peace Corps does is challenges one's creativity, and sometimes you come up with some remarkable little discoveries.
Yeah, we got this barrel full of goodies, Noritake china, and a 5-gallon fire extinguisher, and a set of very, very fine silver. It was what was used normally for an embassy assignment, and it came to Bolo'on in a barrel.
So fine dining, you always were nice and clean when you were eating your rice and potatoes.
The 5-gallon fire extinguisher was a boon because it was a shower. Fill it full of a little warm water, and your partner pumps and squirts while you soap down, and then squirt some more while you rinse off. Then you change positions and add a little
Sounds
more water.
romantic to me, pal. Plus a
Well,
good shower.
we did it in a chicken coop. So.
Oh, well, okay, it was a little downer there, but good for you. Now, where did you discovered water, or?
No. The water was already being piped down to our host family on the other side of the road from an adjacent spring on the mountainside. And they had a 3/4-inch pipe coming down to their place. And I convinced them that I could make a good demonstration of a water tank and an indoor toilet, a water-sealed toilet. I put in a septic tank made out of 55-gallon drums, and a tap over to the sink in the kitchen. So we had running water. It was only cold, but that's okay. And we had a shower, and we had a water-sealed toilet.
So you had the only one in the
It was the only one in the village, and we had a constant stream of people coming in to flush the toilet and to
check it out.
Check it out.
Did other people eventually try to put one in?
Yeah,
after
the
they saw what
doctor,
you did?
Doctora, I can't remember her last name, came and said, "Can you give me some plans for that?" So I drew some plans up and gave them. And she eventually built a water-sealed toilet and a septic tank. We subsequently had a project, a Peace Corps approved project for water-sealed toilets. And it was a very successful community development program, but it came after our education program was there.
Okay, but you were the groundbreaker.
Yeah,
Right. Now, did you have electricity?
none, no.
So,
We had
night, what happened?
Petromax lanterns. They are pump-up kerosene with a silk mantle.
Like the Colemans?
Yeah, like a Coleman.
Okay.
A little more rugged than a Coleman and noisier, but they're very adequate.
Now, how did your wife, who liked the surroundings more, you or your wife?
I liked them more, and it was a hardship for my wife. She eventually said, "This is not for me."
Is that
And
after or before the Cobra bitter?
before.
Okay, okay. 'Cause,
I'll tell you that story if you'd like to hear it.
well, we don't want to scare away any people that are actually young people or middle-aged people ready to retire who are thinking about Peace Corps, because we're really, it's the in many cases it's the height of all experiences. But I think it's a good story. Or bottom line, she got bit, right? So
Well,
she had a couple of bad experiences.
Yeah, she was bitten on her birthday in 1963.
Ouch.
And we were walking along the beach at night without a light, and we shouldn't have done that. It was through the grass, and she felt something hit her foot, and we got up to the Peace Corps Training Center where we were meeting, and I saw 2 little puncture wounds. I put a suction cup on it. She soon began to have some respiratory signs, and we took her and got her.
Bottom line, she survived.
Oh, she survived.
Now, tell me about the young people at the school, and describe the little school that you were in. And as I understand it, you had to take a bicycle to get to that school.
Yeah, Peace Corps gave me a bicycle, and my school was 6 kilometers south of Bolo'on.
Dirt road?
Dirt road and right along the coast. A very pretty bicycle ride. A little hilly, but it was a good exercise in the morning.
You're pedaling out every day and pedaling back every night.
Yep.
And when we talk about schools, again, we're talking about little dirt schools, aren't we?
These schools had
Floor.
dirt floors and bamboo walls with nipa. That's the leafy substance they put on the roofs. And
No materials for
no
teaching.
well, they had blackboards.
Yeah.
And They
How-
didn't have much chalk, but we brought chalk.
When you think back, how creative and how exciting were those days in the sense of trying to figure out each day something to bring to those kids to
That was
help
great.
them a little
It
bit?
was a real challenge. I was asked to do some science experiments, and I chose to unwisely demonstrate static electricity. Have you ever tried to do that in the tropics? On a
Doesn't
hot
sound
and
easy.
sticky- No. Well, you can rub a comb for a long time on silk before it develops any static electricity in a humid climate. And it was a little embarrassing, but we got through it.
But you really get to meet the children, don't you?
Yeah.
And over the years, have you kept track with some of them?
Some of them. We have a former volunteer and staff program called the Philippine Program for Development, and we put money into it for kids that want to go from high school to college.
Good.
And
Wonderful.
we've stayed in touch with a number of them.
Wonderful. I want to talk about the priest for a minute because I think that's a great story. Tell me quickly, because we want to also get into some of these beautiful artifacts and some of the silk that you've brought. And there's a whole second part to your interview, which will be done another week.
Okay.
We'll talk about all of the administrative stuff and a lot of the individual programs. We'll just focus in on your educational program a little bit today. Tell me about the priest, the plane, and saving his life.
After my wife decided not to stay in the barrio, both of us were reassigned to Zamboanga as volunteers, and I was asked to pick a place to put up a cottage, and the Peace Corps provided us with, I think it was 1,800 pesos to build a cottage. So I went to the commanding officer of the Philippine Air Force and asked if I could build a spot right on his property adjacent to the airport. And he said, by all means. We built it, and one day I was about to leave on a trip to visit some volunteers, and I saw this amphibian land, and a priest in a long white cassock get out and sort of shake himself off. And I went over and I said, hello, Father, I wonder if I could look at your airplane. He said, are you interested? I said, yeah. He said, would you like to go for a ride? I said, yeah. And so he said, would you like to steer it? And I said, sure. And he said, go ahead. And I said, do you mind if I do a 360? So I did a 360, kept it level, and rolled out on exactly 360 degrees. And he said, you've done this before. And I said, yes. And he said, how'd you learn to fly? I said, U.S. Air Force.
Now,
And
he turned out to be not the best FAA-approved pilot, as I understand it.
no, he had
prayed
some
more than he
problems.
was a pilot, right?
I happened to be at a place very remote down in Tawi Tawi, way at the end of the Sulu Archipelago, visiting a couple of volunteers down there. And I stopped by the convento of the Oblate order to which Father Jim was assigned. And I said, have you heard anything from Father Jim? Yes, they said he was down in Subutu, which is over by Borneo, and he's due in any moment. I said, well, I'll go back to the airfield and meet him. I just wanted to say hello. And I went over there, and here comes the amphibian on final, flying very, very roughly. It bounced again and again and again, and finally came to a stop. And the canopy opened, the long white hassock stepped out and keeled over, flat on his face. So I ran up there, run, and there were two Filipino, turned out to be engineers in the back, and they both had wide eyes like this. They were frightened to death, and Jim was out cold. I felt his forehead. I got him back with a little water, and he said, I've got to get these engineers to Siasi. Will you fly them? And I said, sure. And I said, but we're not going to Siasi. We're going to the hospital at Jolo.
So you got him in, you took good care of
Yeah,
him.
got him in, and he was suffering from his first bout with malaria.
Well, there were days, I'm sure, when you were feeling like you were accomplishing something, but let's talk about the downside, when some days you wake up and you wonder why you're there. You must have had some of those, unless you were very unique
No,
experience.
I had my share of those, I assure you.
Tell us what those are like. 'Cause
Well,
they really are challenging, to say the least.
Well, I I think the children and the teachers, for that matter, are the saviors when it comes to the down days for a volunteer like me. I would appear at the school and say, what do I expect to accomplish today? We'll go through some basic reading. The children all spoke Visayan as their native tongue. Some of them were from families that used a modicum of Spanish. Some had Tagalog, some had Ilocano, various different dialects, and they were resistant to using English. And I tried to urge them to use English anytime we were having one of my classes. And so they would, and that was very charming and very rewarding to me.
How about in the evenings? Did you and your wife ever talk about what are we doing here? What are we trying to get accomplished?
Oh, yes, yes. We had a collection of books and an open door in the evenings from 6 p.m. until 8 p.m. when people come and borrow books.
Kids are coming in
Yeah.
all
And
during those hours?
they'd come in simply to see my wife and myself
You were
at
the
ease.
entertainment.
Yeah. And we also had a shortwave radio. They loved the radio. And
Now, did you, they would ask about America?
yeah, well, they thought that we were blue seals, they called us. Blue seals because cigarettes had blue seals if they came from the United States.
Ah.
And the GIs were called Amis, A-M-I. And I was an Ami to them, and they had a very high regard for American GIs. And
Did you use those evenings to try to instill an idea or two about the kids, about what they might do in the future, or what they could study, what they could learn, how things might be different than they perceive?
we showed them a lot of pictures, had photographs and books, and we never ran out of discussions. They were always asking a million questions about automobiles. There were very few automobiles there. There were buses and very few of those.
I consider those nights, in my experience as a Peace Corps volunteer, to be really priceless. They were some of the best nights when I look back. I call it dreaming in the dark with the kids and the parents. And do you have that same positive experience?
Exactly. I remember one night we were going through some magazines that I had brought and answering questions about them, and we heard this flutter, flutter, flutter. And I said, "What is that?" And one of the kids said, "Aging," which is a ghost. And I said, "No, it's not a ghost." And it flutter, flutter, flutter. "What is that?" And I went out on the front porch, and there was a huge fruit bat hanging upside down
Oh my goodness gracious.
in our papaya tree.
No ghost.
No ghost.
Good for you. We only have a couple minutes as I understand it, so let me quickly zero in on a few things. The educational experience with the kids, plus for you?
Plus, very definitely a plus.
A lot of chance to talk to them about dreams and give them something to look forward to. Talk to me quickly about these beautiful wood carvings.
These
What
are wood carvings from the mountain province of the Philippines. They do lovely carvings in mahogany and other hardwoods, and then they burnish them. That one is particularly lovely and looks very Indonesian, but it was done in the Philippines, so there's a close proximity to both of these countries, and the Sea Gypsies, the Bajaus, travel back and forth regardless of borders.
Now we have a certificate, and that has to do with the time that I mentioned when you and a bunch of volunteers zipped out into the bay and saved somebody's lives off the boat. Also, we've got these beautiful baskets. What about them?
Well, this is a mountain province basket. They come in various sizes, and
They're used.
They're used. They're not just artistic pieces. They're very comfortable, and they have shoulder harnesses. You can put them on.
Hand
and
woven?
I carried it all over the Philippines when I was traveling regularly.
Wow.
That's instead of a suitcase.
Interesting. I started the program off by saying Peace Corps really is a place for people who dream of adventure and think about it and are scared about it, but eventually take a chance on it, and that in fact by doing so they're not disappointed at the end. Is that true for your Peace Corps
It
experience?
certainly is. Yeah. One of the most valuable chances I ever took.
Okay, well, it's a pleasure to meet you, the Indiana Jones of the Peace Corps, and we're going to follow up on another time with the rest of your escapades.
I'll
Thank
look
you very
forward to
much.
it, Joe.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much. Good night, folks. Thanks a lot.